Okay, so I'm either losing my mind or my entire life has been a lie. I guess I should start with the basics. I'm Jake, 16M, and I live a pretty normal life. At least, I thought I did. I've got two parents who've always seemed like regular, overprotective, kinda embarrassing but loving people. No major family drama. No tragic backstory. Just school, friends, video games, and the occasional dumb argument over curfews. But that was before today. Before I found the paper. Here's what happened. My mom asked me to grab a charger from the junk drawer in her office. Normal, right? Except while I was digging through the mess of random crap. Seriously, why do moms keep every receipt from the last decade? A folder fell off the desk. Papers scattered everywhere. And that's when I saw it. Thick, official-looking paper with my full name on it. And next to it, the word adoption. At first, I literally laughed. Like, haha, what kind of weird mix-up is this? But then I actually read it. Birth date. Mine. Parents listed. Mom and dad. But under adoptive parents. Legal signatures. All there. Guys, my heart just stopped. My hands went cold. My brain refused to work. I sat there, staring at it, feeling like the ground had disappeared under me. And then I heard my mom's voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I jumped so hard I almost dropped the paper. She was standing in the doorway, eyes locked on what I was holding. And the way her face just changed? It was like all the color drained out of her. She looked terrified. She tried to grab the paper out of my hands, but I pulled back before she could. And in that second, I knew. This wasn't some mistake. I wasn't supposed to find this. And worst of all, she had no idea what to say. So, yeah, WTF do I do now? After my mom saw me holding that paper, she completely freaked out. I mean, full-on panic mode. Her face went pale, her eyes were wide, and she reached for the paper like it was a ticking bomb. "Where did you get that?" she asked, voice shaking. I didn't answer. I just held it up and said, "Am I adopted?" No hesitation. No sugarcoating. I needed a straight answer. But instead of answering, she did the worst possible thing. She snatched the paper out of my hands, shoved it into a drawer, and said, "We'll talk about this later." Later. Later. Are you kidding me? You don't just drop a bombshell like that and then walk away like I just asked what's for dinner. "No," I said, standing my ground. "We're talking about this now." She was shaking. I don't think I've ever seen my mom scared before, but she looked terrified. Then, before I could even process what was happening, she turned and bolted out of the room. Like, straight up ran. I followed her into the kitchen, where she was already on her phone, whispering frantically. The second she saw me, she turned her back. Yeah, red flag. I caught a few words before she walked away. Something like, "He found it. I don't know what to do." He. Who's he? My dad. Someone else? At this point, my heart was racing. I felt like I had walked into someone else's life. Like nothing around me was real anymore. I didn't even know what to do. So, obviously, I did what any sane person would. I called my cousin, Mason. Mason, 17M, is basically my best friend. We've grown up together, our families are super close, and if there was anyone who would help me make sense of this mess, it was him. "Me, dude. Emergency. Get over here." Mason. Are you dying? Me, worse. "I think I'm adopted." Mason. LMAO what? Me, not kidding. "Get here now." 15 minutes later, Mason was in my room, sitting across from me as I told him everything. When I was done, he just sat there, blinking like I just told him aliens were real. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's insane. No kidding." He rubbed his chin, thinking. "You ever notice anything weird before? Like, you don't look like your parents, or they've slipped up about something." I started to shake my head, but then I froze. Memories started popping into my brain. Random stuff I'd never questioned before. One time, at a family reunion, my great-aunt June had said something like, "It's amazing how things worked out for you all." My mom shut her up real fast. Dad has this one old picture of a baby that he keeps in his office. I always assumed it was me, but now that I think about it, I don't actually remember them ever saying it was. And then there was that time when I was like 10 and a random lady at the grocery store recognized me. She said something like, "Oh my gosh, is that really him?" before my mom rushed me away. Okay, I'm officially losing it. Mason leaned forward. Dude, there's only one way to find out for sure. I looked at him. And that is... He smirked. We dig. Mason wasn't playing around. The second we decided to dig, he was already making a list. First, he said, pacing my room, we check the house. If there's one adoption paper, there could be more. Second, we figure out who your mom was talking to. Third, DNA test. I groaned. You make this sound like a murder investigation. Dude, this is bigger than a murder. This is your whole existence in question. As much as I hated to admit it, he had a point. We started in the office, where I'd originally found the paper. Mom had shoved it into a drawer, but the second I tried opening it, I realized she'd locked it. Of course, I muttered. Mason grinned. Lucky for you, I know a thing or two about locks. I stared at him. Why? Let's not make this about me, he said, pulling a paperclip from his pocket. Within a minute, he had the drawer open. Inside, there were stacks of documents, bills, birth certificates, tax papers. We dug through them until Mason suddenly froze. Found something. He pulled out another official-looking paper. This one wasn't mine. The name at the top made my stomach lurch. My cousin, Mason. We both just stood there, staring at it. Dude, Mason whispered. This wasn't just about me. Mason was adopted too. He yanked the paper closer, reading fast. His face went pale, and for the first time in forever, I saw him actually shaken. Jake, he said, voice hoarse. My parents aren't my real parents. I didn't even know what to say. My hands felt numb as I looked back into the drawer, pulling out a third paper. My sister's name was on this one. My world was spinning. My sister, Mason, me, how deep did this go? Was anyone in our family actually related? Then we heard footsteps. We barely had time to shove the papers back before my mom appeared in the doorway. Her eyes darted between us, and I knew. She knew. You boys need to stop, she said, voice low. Mason tensed beside me. Stop what? Mom sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You don't understand what you're getting into. I stepped forward, heartbeat hammering. Then explain it to us. For a second, I thought she would. Her lips parted, and she looked tired. But then she just shook her head. Drop it, Jake. I mean it. And then she left, leaving more questions than answers. Mason exhaled sharply. Dude, this is some serious government conspiracy stuff. I wasn't laughing, because the only thing scarier than finding out I was adopted was realizing I might not be the only one. Mason sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't said a word in minutes, which was weird for him. I got it, though. It was one thing for me to find out I was adopted. But both of us? That changed everything. What if we were switched at birth? Mason muttered suddenly. I rolled my eyes. Dude, this isn't a soap opera. Then what the hell is it? He shot back. Because so far, we've got hidden adoption papers, a super shady mom, and an entire family who's just pretending this isn't a big deal. I didn't have an answer. My mind was still stuck on the fact that my sister's name had been on one of those papers, too. I had been so focused on myself that I hadn't even thought about her. Was she adopted too? I pulled out my phone and texted her. Me, hey, random question, but have mom and dad ever acted weird about your birth stuff? Emma, 14F, WTF? Me, just answer. Have you ever seen your birth certificate? Emma, no. Why? Me, just wondering. I put my phone down. Mason was watching me. You're gonna have to tell her. I know, I admitted. I don't know if I should do it now or wait until I figure more out. Mason sat up. Then let's figure more out. That was the thing about Mason. He wasn't the type to sit around and overthink things. He wanted action. Okay, I said. We need answers, and we're not getting them from my mom. Mason nodded. So who will talk? A few names came to mind. My dad. He wasn't home yet, and honestly, I wasn't sure if he'd be any more open about this than Mom was. Other relatives? Maybe, but if Mom was covering this up, they might be in on it too. Then it hit me. Aunt Linda, I said. Mason blinked. Your mom's sister? Yeah. She's never been great at keeping secrets. If anyone will slip up, it's her. Mason grinned. Then what are we waiting for? 10 minutes later, we were biking to Aunt Linda's house. It wasn't far, just a few streets over. When we got there, she was outside watering her plants. She smiled when she saw us. Well, if it isn't my two favorite troublemakers. What brings you here? I hesitated. Now that we were actually here, I wasn't sure how to bring it up. Mason, of course, had no such problem. Hey, so, random question. Why is half our family secretly adopted? I elbowed him. Dude, subtlety. Aunt Linda's face froze. Her grip on the watering can tighten just slightly. Bingo. She recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. What on earth are you talking about? Mason and I exchanged a glance. She was lying. Come on, Aunt Linda, I said. I found the papers. We know. Her smile faltered. You shouldn't have gone digging, Jake. That was not the response I wanted to hear. I took a step closer. So it's true. Aunt Linda sighed, looking around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then, finally, she set down the watering can. Come inside, she said. There's something you boys need to know. The second Mason and I stepped into Aunt Linda's house, I felt it, the heavy weight of something big about to drop. She led us into the kitchen and closed the door behind her like she was worried someone might overhear. That didn't exactly ease my nerves. Mason, of course, had zero patience. Okay, spill. What's the deal? Were we all part of some secret government experiment, or what? Aunt Linda shot him a look. This isn't a joke, Mason. That shut him up real quick. She pulled out a chair and sank into it, rubbing her temples. I knew this would come out eventually, she muttered. I just didn't think it would be you boys finding out this way. I sat down across from her, my pulse hammering. So it's true. Mason and we're adopted. Aunt Linda looked at me for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. My breath caught. I don't know why. I'd already known, but hearing it out loud? That made it real. But it's not just you two, she said, her voice quiet. It's your sister, too. And others. Mason shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean, others? Aunt Linda sighed. You have to understand. This wasn't some cruel lie. It was meant to protect you. From what? I snapped, frustration boiling over. From knowing the truth? Because I'm pretty sure lying to us our whole lives isn't exactly protection. Aunt Linda looked pained. It's not that simple, Jake. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. Then explain it to me. Make it simple. She hesitated, then said, Your parents, your biological parents, weren't able to raise you. Same for Mason. Same for Emma. There were circumstances. My stomach churned. What kind of circumstances? Aunt Linda bit her lip. Your birth mother, Jake. She was in trouble. Serious trouble. She had to disappear. She made your parents promise to keep you safe. To never tell you the truth. The room spun. My birth mother had to disappear? What the hell did that even mean? Mason let out a nervous laugh. Okay, yeah, that sounds exactly like a government conspiracy. Aunt Linda ignored him. It's complicated, Jake. But your parents love you. They've always done what they thought was best. I wanted to argue, to yell, to demand more answers. But before I could say anything, there was a sudden knock at the door. Aunt Linda tensed. Mason and I exchanged a look. Are you expecting someone? I asked slowly. She shook her head. Stay here. Then she got up and walked to the door. Mason and I leaned forward, straining to listen. The door creaked open. A low voice spoke, too quiet for us to hear the words. But Aunt Linda's reaction? That we did hear. Because the second she saw whoever was standing there, she gasped. And then she whispered, "Oh my God! It's you!" Mason and I exchanged wide-eyed looks. Who the hell was at the door? Aunt Linda sounded shaken, which was not a good sign. Without thinking, I crept toward the hallway, Mason right behind me. We peeked around the corner, just enough to see the front door. And that's when I saw her. A woman stood just outside, half hidden by the shadows of the porch. She was older, maybe late 30s, early 40s, dressed in a worn-out hoodie and jeans. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and there were deep lines around her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. She looked nervous. Aunt Linda still hadn't moved. Her hands were gripping the doorframe like she needed it to hold herself up. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. The woman exhaled sharply. I didn't have a choice. Her voice. It was low, tired. But something about it sent a chill through my body, like my brain recognized it, even though I was sure I'd never heard it before. Mason must have felt the same thing because he grabbed my arm and whispered, "Dude, who is that?" I didn't answer, because I was too busy realizing something else. The woman's eyes. They were the exact same color as mine. Aunt Linda's voice wavered. "They can't know." "I think they already do," the woman said, her gaze shifting. Right to me. I sucked in a breath. My stomach flipped inside out. I felt like I was glued to the floor, unable to move, unable to breathe. Aunt Linda turned, finally noticing us. Her face went pale. "Jake, go back inside." "Jake," the woman said softly. And just like that, the whole world stopped. Because the way she said my name, it wasn't like some stranger saying it for the first time. It was like she had been saying it in her head for years. My voice barely worked. "Who are you?" The woman swallowed hard, her eyes searching mine. And then, in the quietest, most broken voice, she said, "I'm your mother." Mason cursed under his breath. Aunt Linda closed her eyes like she was begging the universe to rewind time. But me. I just stood there, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Because no matter how insane it sounded, no matter how much I wanted to deny it, somewhere deep in my bones, I already knew she was telling the truth. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air was thick, like the whole world had hit pause. I just stared at the woman, my mother, as my brain scrambled to keep up. Aunt Linda finally broke the silence. "You can't be here," she said, stepping forward like she was about to push the woman off the porch. "Do you have any idea what kind of risk?" "I had to see him," the woman, my mother, interrupted. Her eyes stayed locked on me, filled with something I couldn't name. Guilt, pain, relief, maybe all of them. I swallowed hard, my voice barely working. "You're my mom." Her lips parted, but it took her a second to actually answer. "Yes." The word felt like a gunshot to the chest. Behind me, Mason whispered, "Dude, what the hell is happening right now?" "Good question, Mason. Really good question." I turned back to the woman. My mind was screaming a million things at once, but somehow, one question pushed its way out first. "Where have you been?" She flinched, just slightly. Her hands clenched at her sides. "I had to leave." "Why?" She hesitated, and that hesitation made something inside me snap. "You don't just leave your kid," I said, my voice sharp. "You don't just disappear and let someone else raise them and never come back. So tell me, why?" Aunt Linda sighed. "Jake, it's not that simple." "Then explain it to me." I snapped, spinning toward her. "Because everyone keeps saying it's complicated, and for my own good, but nobody will actually tell me the truth." My mother, God, it still felt weird calling her that, lowered her head. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Because it wasn't safe." The room went still again. Mason was the first to break the silence. "Wait, What? My mother looked back at me, her expression tight. Jake, I wanted you more than anything in the world. But I couldn't keep you. Not with him looking for me. My stomach flipped. Him. She swallowed hard. Your father. My breath caught. You mean, my real dad? She nodded. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. What do you mean, looking for you? Why would he? Aunt Linda cut in, voice firm. Jake. This is dangerous territory. I shot her a look. I think I deserve some answers. My mother exhaled shakily. Your father was not a good man. I had to get away from him. And when I found out I was pregnant with you, I knew I couldn't raise you in that kind of life. So I left. I ran. And I begged your adoptive parents to keep you safe, to never tell you the truth, because if he ever found out where you were. She trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. I suddenly felt sick. My real father. A bad man. A dangerous man. One who had been looking for her. For me. I took a step back, my head spinning. This is insane. I know, she said, her voice tight. I know, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't stay away any longer. I had to see you. I had to make sure you were okay. Aunt Linda crossed her arms. And you didn't think about what would happen if he found out you were here? My mother's face darkened. He won't. He can't. How can you be sure? She hesitated again. And that was all I needed to see. You don't know, do you? I whispered. My voice felt hollow. She looked at me, her eyes sad. No, I don't. The coldest feeling of my life settled over me. If my father was still out there, if he had spent all these years looking, and if my mother had just led him straight to me, I wasn't safe anymore. Aunt Linda cursed under her breath, running a hand through her hair. Mason just stood there, looking between us like he was watching a bomb slowly tick down. I felt numb, like my body was here, but my mind was still trying to process everything. My whole life, I thought I was just a normal kid with a normal family. Now, I find out my real dad was some dangerous guy who might still be looking for me? Yeah. No part of me knew how to handle that. I swallowed hard. So, what happens now? Nobody answered. Aunt Linda finally turned to my mom. You need to leave. You showing up here. Huge mistake. My mom clenched her jaw. I just wanted to see him. Yeah. And now you might have put him in danger. I stiffened. Wait, so you actually think he could find me? Aunt Linda didn't answer right away. She rubbed her temples like her brain was working overtime. Mason finally spoke up. Okay, so just to be clear, we don't know if this guy is actually still looking, right? Like, it's been what? 16 years. He could have moved on. My mother's voice was tight. You don't move on from something like this. Aunt Linda muttered something under her breath, then turned to me. Jake, go home. I frowned. What? Why? Because I need to clean up this mess, and you don't need to be part of it. Mason snorted. Little late for that. Aunt Linda shot him a look before turning back to me. Go. Don't tell your mom about this. And if anything feels off, if you see someone hanging around your house, if you get any weird calls, you tell me immediately. My stomach twisted. Jesus, Linda, you're making it sound like I'm being hunted. She didn't answer. That was the worst part. She just looked at me with this tight, unreadable expression. Like she didn't want to say out loud what we were all thinking. I left with Mason, my brain still trying to process everything. We got on our bikes and rode in silence for a few minutes before he finally spoke. Dude, he muttered. Your life just turned into an action movie. I shot him a look. Not helpful. I'm just saying, evil dad? Secret past. Shady family cover-up. He shook his head. You're one car chase away from being in a full-blown thriller. I rolled my eyes, but my stomach was in knots. Because what if this was a thriller? What if my dad was still out there? What if he found out I existed? And worst of all, what if he was already looking? By the time I got home, my head was pounding. Mason had left after making me promise to keep him updated, but honestly, I didn't know what I'd even be updating him on. My mother, my real mother, was somewhere out there, probably arguing with Aunt Linda right now. My adoptive mom had spent my whole life lying to me. And my biological father? The dangerous man I had never met? Yeah. Apparently, he might be looking for me. I felt like throwing up. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. Mom wasn't home yet, which was probably a good thing. If she had been, I might have started yelling the second I saw her. I trudged upstairs, feeling like my whole body was made of lead. I just needed to breathe, to think, to figure out. A vibration in my pocket snapped me out of it. I pulled out my phone. A text. From an unknown number. Unknown. Did you talk to her? I blinked. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Who is this? No response. Not for a few minutes, anyway. An unknown. Be careful, Jake. I stared at the screen, my pulse skyrocketing. I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't Mason messing with me. He wouldn't joke about something like this. Aunt Linda wouldn't be cryptic like that. Which left only one possibility. Someone was watching me. My hands went cold. I darted toward the window, heart hammering against my ribs. My room was on the second floor, so I had a clear view of the street. And then I saw it. A car. Parked across the road. Black. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. It hadn't been there earlier. It wasn't moving. It wasn't running. It was just there. Watching. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, to not panic. But there was no pretending anymore. This wasn't just some mystery about my past. It was my present, and someone out there knew the truth. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at the black car parked across the street, my heart pounding like a war drum. I didn't know how long it had been there. I didn't know who was inside. But I did know one thing. This wasn't a coincidence. The text, the warning, the way my entire life had blown up in the last 24 hours. This was all connected. I reached for my phone with shaky hands and did the only thing I could think of. I called Mason. He answered instantly. Yo, what's up? There's a car outside my house, I whispered, still keeping my distance from the window. I think someone's watching me. Mason didn't even hesitate. I'm coming over. I exhaled shakily. Hurry. I hung up and peeked back outside. The car hadn't moved. The windows were still dark. But someone was in there. I could feel it. I considered calling Aunt Linda. Or my mom. Or even the police. But what would I say? Hi, yeah, I just found out I'm adopted. My birth dad might be a criminal, and now there's a mystery car outside my house. Please help. Yeah, that wasn't gonna go well. Before I could think too much, I heard footsteps outside. Mason. I rushed downstairs and threw open the door. He was out of breath from biking so fast. Okay, he panted. Where's that? His eyes landed on the black car. He stiffened. Yeah, I muttered. That. Mason squinted at it. Dude. That is so a stalker car. Not helping. Sorry. He exhaled. Okay. So, what do we do? Call someone? Go full spy mode and sneak up on it. I hesitated. I wanted to run. To hide. To pretend this wasn't happening. But I was done with running. I clenched my fists. We go talk to them. Mason's eyes widened. I was mostly kidding about that part. I stepped onto the porch. I'm not. Before Mason could argue, I was already walking toward the car. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I didn't stop. I needed to know. I reached the driver's side and knocked on the window. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. Slowly, the window rolled down. And I saw him. A man. Maybe late 40s. Sharp jawline, short dark hair that was graying at the sides. His face was rugged, like he'd seen things most people hadn't. His eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto mine. And he smiled. Hello, Jake. I went ice cold. He knew my name. Mason took a step back. Oh, hell no. I swallowed hard. Who are you? The man tilted his head, studying me. Then he said, in a voice that made my blood run cold, you already know who I am. I couldn't breathe. No. This wasn't happening. But deep down, I knew the truth. My father had found me. And just like that, my past had caught up to me. I had no idea what he was going to say. No idea if I was ready to hear it. Was he here to explain, to apologize, or to pull me into something far worse? Either way, there was no running now. That's it for today's story. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more wild Reddit stories. Until next time, stay curious and keep the stories coming.